Good morning. The right to vote and the right to cast an unfettered vote are cornerstones of our democracy. And when the Supreme Court of the United States invalidated key provisions of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, we were asked, that is, Congress was asked, to update the formula that they cast out. Many people recall that that formula was based upon the turnout of the elections of 1964. And over time, though we in the Congress thought that we were updating sufficiently, laying out the record that was required, the Supreme Court asked us to find an updated formula. And so we have been hard at work since then trying to do that. We have seen since that decision a proliferation of activity in various states around the country, erecting impediments to voting. And so we have advanced what we call the Voting Rights Advancement Act to answer the Supreme Court's call to restore the vote. And that's why we have labeled our outreach strategy, Restore the Vote. And because elections are traditionally held in the country on Tuesdays, we are launching Restoration Tuesday for every member of Congress for every Tuesday that we're in session to raise this issue of restoring the vote in all of our activity on the floor. And so now to talk about all of these recent episodes, as well as the presentation this morning, I want to yield now to the lady who has been at the forefront of this effort, the lady who represents that little place that gave rise to the 1965 Voting Rights Act, the lady from Selma, Ms. Terri Sewell.
Today, November 3rd, 2015, is 1 year from the presidential election of 2016, and I'm proud to stand alongside members of the Democratic House Caucus to launch #RestoreTheVote, a legislative strategy. This national effort will help mobilize support for the Voting Rights Advancement Act, a bill that I sponsored with Representative Judy Chu and Representative Linda Sánchez to restore critical federal oversight. As Mr. Clyburn said, the Supreme Court really issued Congress a challenge to come up with a new formula. And we believe that the Voting Rights Advancement Act not only comes up with a new formula, a modern-day formula with a look back of 25 years, looking at recent voter discrimination since 1990. In doing so, those states that have 15 or more violations will get covered under the preclearance requirement. And there are 13 states that would be covered under that new formula. Those states range from New York and California, Arizona, to South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Texas, Arizona. It's a lot of states. And to put it mildly, the Voting Rights Advancement Act really is about more federal protection or more protection to more people in more states. That's what we're here to do. You know, I was honored to welcome the President of the United States, President Barack Obama, his wife, and his children, as well as 100 members of Congress, many of whom are standing on the stage today, to Selma just this past year for the 50th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March. It was indeed a kumbaya moment. But you know, we came back to Washington after that March 7th, and we didn't do anything. And it's unacceptable in this nation that we still have modern-day barriers to voting. We don't have to count how many marbles in our jar, but we do have voter ID laws, like the one in Alabama, where people are required to have photo IDs. And the state of Alabama most recently decided to close 31 DMV offices. The most popular form of photo ID is a driver's license. And to close 31 offices, you know, that would have been under preclearance not allowed. It just goes to show you that the Supreme Court, who issued us a challenge, said we needed to find modern day examples. Well, Alabama all day long provides modern day examples of voter discrimination. And so I just say that we want to declare every Tuesday that we're here in session, Restoration Tuesday, like today. We want to wear our pins, which are red, white, and blue, because we believe voting is just as American as anything. And we want to make sure that our colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, gathered together in Alabama that day. We really issued to them a call to action. We need to do more than just have a moment of reflection once a year on top of that bridge. We have to be motivated to do something about it. And if one American is denied the right to vote, it is an assault on all Americans' integrity of the electoral process. So we must do something. We call for our colleagues to help us remember that silencing any voice, we must not silence any voice in our electorate. These are the voices of the excluded. Restore the vote. Voices of the excluded. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Leader Pelosi.
Thank you very much. Are we all enthused and thankful and grateful to Congresswoman Terri Sewell for her passion and her great intellect on this subject. I'm proud to join Mr. Clyburn, our assistant leader, Congresswoman Sewell, Congresswoman Sánchez, Congresswoman Judy, the co-authors of the legislation on Restoration Tuesday, and to be with all of our colleagues. Here's the thing: this court decision, Shelby versus Holder, Shelby County versus Holder, was really an unfortunate decision of the court. It wasn't that long ago, in 2006, when we passed the more recent Voting Rights Act. That legislation passed the Senate unanimously. And in the House, what was it, Steny? 90% of the House voted in a bipartisan way for that legislation. We celebrated by going down the steps of the Capitol with Senator Frist. I think it was the majority leader at the time in the Senate, Speaker Hastert. It was a bipartisan, nonpartisan initiative. And lo and behold, a few years later, the court decided that our basis needed updating. It was only a matter of a few years. And we didn't think that that was right, but nonetheless, the court ruled in that way. And as Congresswoman Sewell said, they gave us an opening. And that opening, when we were in Selma this year, and the bipartisanship of people being there, President Bush was there, who signed the Voting Rights Act. It was such an honor that he came to presidents and who had signed the Voting Rights Act, that coming back from Selma, they said, that's all you're going to get. Not President Bush, but the Republicans in Congress. We had a bipartisan bill. It was a compromise. We thought it had a good prospect of success, but they said, you got a visit to Selma. You're not getting a bill on the floor. And that just isn't right. As Congresswoman Sewell said, the integrity of our whole voting system is in question when we put up these barriers. As Steny knows this and others do, we go to different countries to view their elections to see if they are legitimate. If we saw some of these barriers to participation that are being put up in our own country, we would object as to whether it was a fair election. We cannot have that in our country. We are the beacon, the greatest democracy that ever existed in the history of the world, but only legitimate if every person who is qualified has the right to vote and that their votes are counted as cast. Restoration Tuesday gives us a way to reach out, to engage, to re-engage, so that people see the connection between their vote, legislation that passes, and their lives, as Martin Luther King pointed out to us. So we really, this is very important to our democracy, and I thank our co-sponsors of the bill and the leadership of Congressman Clyburn, Assistant Leader Clyburn, on this important subject, as fundamental to our democracy. As fundamental to our democracy. And with that, I'm pleased to yield to the distinguished Mr. Hoyer, who's been a champion on this issue for many years. Mr. Hoyer.
Thank you very much, Leader Pelosi. Thank you very much, Assistant Leader Clyburn. And thank you very much, Terri Sewell, the representative of Selma, Alabama, which has been made so famous and critical in the effort to make sure that everybody can vote. Democracy is about inclusion. Democracy is based upon the theory that the more people that participate, the better product we will have in a democracy. Shelby County, which has been famous for excluding people, came to court and said the situation has changed. And unfortunately, 5 of the justices believed that was the case, but urged Congress to accommodate the new circumstances. This is what this bill does. It's called an Advancement Act. It's an advancement of our democracy. Justice Ginsburg, in the dissenting opinion, who said that the voting rights that George Bush signed in 2006 ought to remain in place, made a compelling analogy, in my opinion. She said that the majority had an umbrella up, and it was raining hard, but they weren't getting wet. And so they decided to give the umbrella away. And when they did so, millions of the excluded have been soaked in the bad policy of exclusion. This bill tends to and tries to and will bring them in, out of the rain, into inclusion. That's why this bill is so important. That's why this bill should be passed. That's why every Tuesday, not just when we're in session, but every Tuesday, which is the voting day in America, it's a voting day today in Virginia and in Tennessee and some other places, and in Texas and in California. Today, people are voting. That's what democracy is about. That's what Restoration Tuesday is about, making sure that everybody can vote and everybody's vote is counted. I am so proud to join all of my colleagues here and the caucuses that represent so many people who find every day that they're excluded, but that must never be excluded from full participation in our democracy. I am now pleased to yield to the chairman of our Democratic caucus, Mr. Becerra.
Thank you, Mr. Whip. I would first begin by saying to Terri Sewell, thank you for never giving up, to Jim Clyburn for leading us in this effort, and to all of my colleagues who are here for understanding the importance of what we discussed today. For so many of us who are standing here, this pin symbolizes so much. This pin lets us try to change the world, to make opportunity available for so many people like our parents and our grandparents who did not have those opportunities. But the problem is this pin would not be possible for most of us standing up here if it weren't for what this pin represents, and that is the vote. If we can't vote, we can't wear this pin here. If we can't wear this pin here, we can't extend to others what we know they have thrived, they have longed for so long to achieve. We should all have that opportunity to say that we will vote, not just on day of election, but as members of Congress, as people who will make a difference for others. And so the reality is we need everyone in America to wear this pin, literally and figuratively, so that so many of us have an opportunity to continue to wear this pin and make this place so much better for all those who never quite had a chance to dream. Para muchos de nosotros lo que vemos este día es la oportunidad de señalar que contamos. Muchos de nosotros contamos para mucho, por mucho, porque somos congresistas. Y aquí, con este sello, tengo la representación de ser un congresista, con esa obligación, pero ese poder de votar para todos los ciudadanos de este país. Pero sin este símbolo, el símbolo del voto, este símbolo no es posible. Porque si no votamos, no contamos. Our vote is our voice. And for those of us standing here, it is personal because it becomes a voice for so many. And that's why we are here to say, restore the vote. Let me now yield to the Vice Chairman of the Democratic Caucus, Joe Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Leader. Let me first say to my good friend Jim Clyburn, thank you for your leadership on this issue. You have been steadfast and tenacious. And let me just say to my good friend from Alabama, Terri Sewell, never curb your enthusiasm. It is contagious. I want to thank between Americans and the ballot box. we can ensure that fundamental tenets of our democracy are upheld. This bill has been called ambitious. This bill has been called aggressive. That's exactly right. It is ambitious and it is aggressive. But most importantly, it is needed. Because when one of the cornerstones of our democracy is at stake, we cannot settle for anything else. By passing this bill, we can restore the protections lost by the Shelby County decision and strengthen our nation's voter laws. By passing this bill, we can ensure that every voter, no matter where they live or the color of their skin, is able to participate in our democracy to the fullest extent. And by passing this bill, we can say to all those trying to restrict the right to vote, not today, not ever. Let's pass this legislation. Let's protect the right to vote. Let's make sure voter discrimination is a thing of the past. We owe it to those who came before us to ensure their sacrifice is not just a footnote in history. Restore the vote. And with that, I would like to call upon the chair of the Black Caucus, Mr. G.K. Butterfield.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley, and good morning. I am Congressman G.K. Butterfield. I represent the 46th member Congressional Black Caucus. We represent 23 states collectively, more than 30 million people, including the District of Columbia and the Virgin Islands. And we are honored to participate in this press conference today. We look forward to future press conferences because the American people must know what is happening to voting rights in America. Many of you have been covering the CBC for many years, and you know our agenda quite well. Our agenda includes so many things, but nothing is more important to the Congressional Black Caucus than eliminating barriers to voting rights. We are appalled as a caucus that states all across the country are beginning to enact voting law changes with impunity that will have the purpose or effect of diminishing the influence of the black vote in America. It reminds us painfully of our history where literacy tests and poll taxes were used, where at-large elections and other discriminatory election schemes were used in years gone by. The Congressional Black Caucus is fighting back. Since the Supreme Court's ruling in Shelby County versus Holder, we have witnessed a renewed assault on voting rights. We see it every day. In my home state of North Carolina, we are facing efforts designed to disenfranchise black voters, from the legislature's redistricting plan, which incidentally is now in litigation, to a voter ID mandate that would threaten thousands of black voters. And so restoring the full effect of the Voting Rights Act, that act that was passed on August 6, 1965, a few days after I finished high school. I remember it so well. It is one of the most important pieces of legislation ever passed by this Congress. It eliminated the literacy test. It created the opportunity for black voters to litigate in federal court. It also created a Section 5 that would prevent mischief, to prevent states and local jurisdictions from enacting voting law changes that were discriminatory. And I want to reemphasize in closing something that Mr. Clyburn said in the beginning. The U.S. Supreme Court did not strike down Section 5. That is a misunderstanding all across the country. Section 5 is intact. What is in question is the formula used to give life to Section 5. And so what the Supreme Court has done is simply to ask this Congress to revisit the formula, to update the formula using modern data so that the Justice Department can continue to enforce Section 5. Restoring the Voting Rights Act is critical to our effort to have access to the ballot box and participation in this democracy. I join my colleagues. Let's restore the vote. And the next time we come to this press gallery, I'm going to bring with me, Madam Leader, a copy of President Bush signing the 2006 extension of Section 5. I have it enlarged in my office with Mr. Sensenbrenner and others, Mr. Conyers and others surrounding him on the south side of the Capitol, signing the extension of the Voting Rights Act. Republicans, Democrats need to join together and do it again. Thank you. Yes, I yield now to all of our friends, no stranger to anyone in this body, Congresswoman Linda Sánchez of California, a representative of the Congressional Hispanic, chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Thank you.
Thank you, JK. I'm pleased to stand with my colleagues and to stand up for voting rights. You know, these attempts to restrict voting participation affect all of our communities. All of us here represent districts that are multicultural. They hurt all communities, but in particular, there are several communities that suffer the consequences and experience those consequences a little bit more. In this country, every 30 seconds, a Latino turns 18 and becomes eligible to register to vote. Next year, Latinos are projected to be 28.5 million voters nationwide. The growth in the Latino community is apparently very threatening to some people because they're intent on trying to suppress their right to vote. 2 years ago, the Supreme Court's decision in Shelby County left 7 million eligible Latino voters without vital voting protections. That's 7 million people too many. And for some reason, it's become in vogue to attack the Latino community. We've been vilified, called rapists, marijuana smugglers, and FedEx packages to be tracked. Well, the only way that we're going to stop those attacks on our community is to raise our voices and to participate and to vote. But when that right to vote is restricted, it limits your ability to stand up and fight for yourself. So part of our job is to make sure that voting protections are strengthened. Because every time an early voting site is eliminated or a voter ID law is implemented, that's another Latino voter that's being kept from their fundamental right to vote. We must restore the right to vote. Tenemos que restaurar el derecho al voto. Immigrants to this country, when they were first here, they were legal permanent residents but did not have the right to vote. But on our 18th birthday for each of their children, they made sure that we registered to vote and we participated. They saw it as a responsibility of being a citizen in this country. They took that responsibility very seriously. And I can only imagine how much more difficult our participation would have been made if we didn't have access to multilingual voting materials, or if they moved polling places at the last minute on election day. We shouldn't be making voting harder for people in this country. We should welcome participation. We should be protecting the right to vote, and we should be making participation easier. Thank you for your attention, and now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague who has been working with Representative Sewell and I on this important piece of legislation, the chair of the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus, Representative Judy Chu.
As chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, I stand with my colleagues today in support of restoring one of the most sacred rights we have as Americans, the right to vote. The recent assault on voting rights is shameful, and the Asian American and Pacific Islander community knows it all too well. It was Congress that passed the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which prevented Chinese Americans from becoming naturalized citizens so that they could not vote. For 60 long years this lasted, leaving a legacy of disenfranchisement. And it wasn't until the Voting Rights Act passed 50 years ago that much of this changed for Asian Pacific Islanders and many others who had been previously shut out of the process. For over 4 decades, the Voting Rights Act was one of our best tools to ensure that communities of all backgrounds had a voice in our democracy. For Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, 70% of whom were born in another country, this meant translated voting materials, absentee ballots, and freedom from intimidation at the polls. But since the Supreme Court's Shelby decision 2 years ago, gutting key provisions of the Voting Rights Act, states like Texas and Alabama have raced like horses out of the gate to enact terrible laws that are making it harder for communities of color to exercise their fundamental right to vote. It's clear that we need this national standard to safeguard the voting rights of all Americans. We need to pass H.R. 2867 and restore the right to vote. And now, I would like to turn the podium back over to our leader, Mr. Clyburn.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chu. Let me say before I offer for any questions, this is a bipartisan piece of legislation. The Senate bill was introduced by Senator Leahy and Senator Murkowski of Alaska. And so this bill is bipartisan, and I want to thank my colleagues here for all the work that they've done in helping us advance this Voter Rights Advancement Act, and we'll now answer any questions you may have. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Clyburn, is there any, I hear what you're saying about the Senate bill having bipartisan support, but is there any consideration, because Congressman Sewell's bill is very expansive. There's a previous version from Mr. Conyers and Mr. Sensenbrenner that was also bipartisan, that was a little more narrow. Is there any concern because this bill isn't going anywhere, going back to a more narrow, compromise, more bipartisan version?
Well, you may recall that the Sensenbrenner Conyers legislation did not go anywhere either. And to us, that was a bare minimum. We faced severe criticism from the civil rights community and the voting rights community because they thought that we had so narrowed the bill until we excluded states that were engaging in mischief, my state being one of them. We were not covered. Alabama, where all of this started, under the formula they came up with, Alabama, it was not going to be covered. And so what we did was we decided to use what the Supreme Court asked us to use and use it in such a way that it would be modern and it would be fair. And we will say to any state, if you don't have any intentions to be mischievous, you ought not be worried about it. Yes, sir.
During the drafting of all of this, and as you've been reaching across the aisle, do you have any sense of where the new Speaker, Paul Ryan, stands on this? Have there been any discussions with him? Do you see him as an ally? Because Chairman Goodlatte is opposed to this idea across the board. He hasn't brought it up. He hasn't considered it at all. And it seems to me if Speaker Ryan is going to shift the power to the chairmanship, that this thing's going nowhere. So how do you get over that hurdle?
Well, I'm going to yield to answer that to Mr. Butterfield and Ms. Sewell. Maybe they have spoken with him. I have not.
I have not spoken to Speaker Ryan about this, but I can tell you that Restoration Tuesday is about educating the American people, informing the American people about this issue. Most Americans don't understand that the ability to vote effectively in many states has been removed. If the American people really know the import of the inaction of this Congress, I believe public opinion will rise. And if public opinion were to rise, I believe that the politicians, including the chairman of the committee, would be forced to move this bill to the floor for an up or down vote. During the 1965 debate on the Voting Rights Act, we faced similar obstacles during that debate. But it was public opinion, and it was the strong hand of the President of the United States that forced it to happen. And I believe the political climate in this country today can lend itself to getting the Restoration Act passed.
Excuse me. Any other questions? If not, thank you so much.